Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Raphaël Vedi. I'm an ESG data specialist at WeeFin, an innovative fintech dedicated to accelerating sustainable finance. It is my pleasure to be hosting today's discussion. Over the next 30 to 45 minutes, we will be unpacking together the key findings from WeeFin's 2026 Guide to Sustainable Finance Labels, and we will be taking a closer look at LuxFLAG's labeled offering. If you have any question, you are very welcome to post them in the chat at any time during this webinar, and we'll take 15 minutes at the end to answer you. As I was mentioning, for the second year, we have published a guide to sustainable finance labels aimed at supporting financial institutions in the analysis and comparison of the label available on the European market. For the 2026 edition, we have added new analysis dimensions related to the treatment of sovereign bonds, as well as to all the constraints applicable to funds of funds. These criteria are intended to be read in the context of the SFDR review, since the proposed provisions could be slightly different from those sustainable finance labels put forward at the moment. As well as adding analysis dimensions, we have also broadened the scope of the analysis to include new labels. So we have included FNG Cycle Transition, which we had the opportunity to cover in a webinar in 2025, and also LuxFLAG Transition Label and LuxFLAG Impact Labels, which has a generalist label, as well as a climate and nature focus and a social focus. These last labels were recently introduced by LuxFLAG, which is why I am delighted to be joined today by Ahmed Ouammara, Head of Sustainability Operation at LuxFLAG since January 2022. Ahmed is responsible for the operational translation of LuxFLAG strategy and label developments, and he leads the team in charge of reviewing labeling applications. Thank you, Ahmed, for joining us today. It's very wonderful to have you with us. Before we dive in, I should mention that recording will be shared with all the registered participants in the coming days. Now, to kick things off, our first question concerns the place of sustainable finance labels in today's market. So what are the main challenges and opportunities for sustainability labels in the sustainable finance ecosystem? Ahmed?
Thank you, Raphael. If I may start with a massive thanks to WeeFin for the organization of this webinar, of course, for gathering such an impressive audience with us today, and also for the good work done with this guide about sustainability labels that you have prepared. I'm extremely happy to be here today to explain what we're doing at LuxFLAG and to answer your questions. You've asked on main challenges and opportunities for sustainability labels. I think we would all agree that the overall sustainable finance ecosystem is complex. It includes multiple pieces of regulation, and every piece of regulation is catering for a different type of stakeholder. There is SFDR impacting product manufacturers, MiFID for distribution purpose and for the collection of ESG preferences. There is the CSRD impacting investing companies directly. So what we've seen is more regulation, more products, more scrutiny from investors and the society, but yet we see a puzzle with different pieces, and label plays a role in actually bridging the gap between these regulations, one, but also between regulation and investors. The key challenge, I would say, from our perspective, would be the materialization that labels mean something concrete and consistent, and that goes beyond compliance box ticking. The opportunity from our view is that labels like ours, they fill that credibility gap. They provide an independent and rigorous verification. And I think this is why there's attraction towards label. The evolution that we see, it lies in the complementarity. And I really want you to take this point away, is the complementarity between labels and regulation. And labels, they go further in the specificity, in fact. As the market evolves, what we've seen is that a one-size-fits-all doesn't work for investors, and that's exactly the direction that LuxFLAG took with an ESG, with a transition and an impact label architecture.
Thank you. And speaking of LuxFLAG approach, how would you define the main objective of LuxFLAG labels? What differentiates your approach from the other sustainability label available on the European market today?
Well, to start, LuxFLAG provides independent, credible, third-party verification that a financial product genuinely or actually does what it claims. I like to say that it verifies what's on the tin, basically. What we're not is that we're not a rating agency. We grant labels on the basis of a binary pass-fail system, which is based on pre-documented criteria and not a score. So that's what we're not. Now about our roots and why we're so specific is that our roots are connected to the impact world. LuxFLAG was created initially for microfinance product. Today, this microfinance label is part of the impact category of labels. So I would say that what makes LuxFLAG stand out is really the fact that our agency is multi-label with an architecture proposing ESG, transition, impact labels. Also, our aim is to go beyond the borders of Luxembourg and Europe, as we made products from international jurisdiction eligible to our labels. And finally, I would say the last point where I think that's very specific to LuxFLAG is that our process is totally handled in-house with our team of specialists and specialists in sustainable and impact investing that has been built over the 20 years of existence of LuxFLAG. What we've done as well is to conduct a revision of our labeling framework overall in 2025. And the conclusion of it, or the outcome, was the introduction of a transition label and of an impact label. And we've started this with the launch of the transition label in September 2025.
Thank you. So you mentioned the transition label and the impact label. This will be the focus point of this webinar in the next question. Beginning with the LuxFLAG transition label. So I think the main question financial institutions ask themselves is, how do you define a transition fund? What are the key criteria that would distinguish a transition fund from a fund label or under a broader ESG label?
Thank you. So our approach starts at the product and strategy level. We consider if you want a top-down approach, and the first element would be product strategy and objective. What we expect here is that the transition product would invest primarily in activities or companies that are in the process of reducing their negative environmental or social footprint. By primarily, we mean 50% of its AUM. Those activities, they're not necessarily green today, green, quote unquote, but they have a credible and measurable path towards it. What's important to mention as well from an asset allocation perspective is that the allocation is open. It's open to sectors, to a wide range of economic sectors, and not only focusing on those hard to abate sectors. So it's not defined by the fact that the entire portfolio would be brown transitioning to green, but it can be a blend of different sort of colors, not only those hard to abate. The key distinction that you've been asking as well, the key distinction from the ESG label. The ESG label assesses the fund integration of ESG criteria into investment decisions. That's what it does. The transition label, it requires evidence of a directional change. So the trajectory matters maybe even more than the current state of the portfolio or the invested companies that we would find in the portfolio. With the transition product, we also consider another element to be key, that's the engagement. The engagement would play an important role, and in particular, the engagement strategies and the KPIs that are tied to those improvements expected over time. And likewise, the exclusion of companies with no credible transition plan, that will be also an important criteria for us. We think as well that transition is not only a climate or environmental story. There's social inequalities that may be structural or systemic. So it broadens as well the label's relevance. And we also acknowledge that a just transition includes a human dimension. So the LuxFLAG transition label, with the LuxFLAG transition label, we voluntarily allow social factors to be integrated. For example, we will be talking about decent work, supply chain standards, or community impact, etc. In terms of data, if we're looking at the data component, and I'm stretching a bit hope you don't mind, Raphael, I'm stretching a little bit the dimensions here. If we talk about data and how we consider the data and the monitoring of transition there, we would say that, first of all, applicants, they may have a specific investment mandate, yet as a labeling agency, we would not prescribe a list of KPIs that applicants must absolutely monitor and report. We're not imposing a type of KPI or a type of specific areas that investee companies should be reporting on and that the applicant product likewise should be reporting on. What our approach does is to focus on the selection of trajectory KPIs relevant with the investment strategy. That can be, for example, carbon intensity reduction over time. That can be the proportion of revenues aligned to transition activity. It could be company level, the engagement outcomes. It could be social indicators like the employee conditions or the gender pay gap trend within a sector or a company. So the applicants, they may additionally rely on on top of those KPIs, if they have the means and the resources to track them directly one-on-one with the investee company, then I would say it's the ideal scenario. But next to it, there's also a number of existing frameworks or standards that can be used because it's just how the market works. And they can adhere to those transition standards or frameworks to define and monitor their targets. Also because it gives a framework and it gives another verification layer. So here I'm thinking of standards such as the SBTI or the CREM for the real estate sector, for example. And there are many others that are also all valid and eligible, but those are the first two, I would say, coming up in my head. On data, again, I would say that we would be looking at two dimensions. forward-looking dimension with targets, CapEx plan. We consider it, of course, to be important, but also what is important is to look at backward-looking performance. So I think this is an important aspect we want to highlight here.
Thank you. At WeeFin, we love ESG data, so of course you're very welcome to speak about them. I think it provides very operational information to financial institutions when they're thinking of transition and transition labels. So it's very precious for us and for the ecosystem to speak about this data. In addition to LuxFLAG transition, you also introduced a brand new LuxFLAG impact label in December 2025, as you mentioned before. This label is structured around two focuses. So climate and nature is the first one, and the social focus would be the second one. This label is the first of its kind in the European Sustainable Finance Label ecosystem. So can you tell us a little bit more about this definition of an impact fund? What is your methodology and how do you deal with these two focuses when a fund could be diversified?
Thank you, of course. Maybe to start with a bit of background on this impact label. So it does regroup the former environment label, climate finance label, and social impact label. So we had up until December 25 when those were actually regrouped under one single umbrella. And this umbrella is indeed the impact label. What it does allow, of course, is to help applicants to materialize their impact credential through, again, a verification of their impact objective, the measurement and management of their impact, and the alignment with impact teams. So we would be looking at those three, I would say, key component within the impact label. And I think really, if there's one element I would like you to take away from this impact label is those elements. Impact objective, measurement and management of the impact, and the alignment with impact team. In detail, what does it mean practically speaking? It means that we are mapping the different components of the impact definition. So we think that within the impact definition, in the first place, there needs to be intentionality. And this intentionality would be demonstrated with the materialization of impact objectives. That's one. The second sub-point here would also be looking at ensuring that there is still a target for a financial return. And it's really important because it also helps to differentiate against philanthropy type of products. So here, when we're looking at the impact objective, we are saying, first of all, we are looking at intentionality, and we want to distinguish against the philanthropy. That's one. We can set it aside. Then on the impact measurement and management, well, here that would be through the selection of relevant KPIs, and of course, their monitoring. That's one side of the coin, but then still the other side of the coin will be the mitigation of potential adverse impacts. That would be, for example, through the application of exclusions, where on the one hand, you might be targeting a specific impact and alignment with impact teams, but on the other hand, you would not be looking at specific sectors that are considered harmful. Then we want to ensure that the asset allocation will prioritize investments that generate impact with a predominant allocation towards activities that are aligned with impact teams. It's a long sentence that basically means that we would be looking at having a 70% alignment with the impact teams. 70% of the AUM are required to be aligned with the impact teams, meaning that for every investee company, we need to have a connection between investment A and the alignment with a targeted specific impact team, one or multiple impact team, actually. But at least that we can make easily that connection between I invest in this company because they're contributing to this particular impact team. I don't know, climate adaptation, for example. So we consider that those teams, they could be across both climate and nature or social themes. The LuxFLAG approach, again, would be very pragmatic in this respect. We recognize that real-world impact portfolios, they're often thematic blends. They're not 100% focusing on one specific kind of impact team or one specific type of sector. Sometimes they may, but actually there is a good population of fund that is a bit more blend than that. So in those cases, the applicant would be awarded the impact label. So it means that if your allocation is more than 70% towards climate and nature theme, then the product would be qualified as impact label, climate and nature focus. If your allocation is more than 70% in social theme, you would be qualified as impact label, social focus. And if your allocation is more than 70%, but blended between climate and nature and social, then it would be impact label. And that's it, right? So there is the overall layer, impact label, blend, if you wish. And then underneath you have, if you're specific about climate and nature, then you would get the climate and nature focus. And if you're specific more in your asset allocation towards social investments, then you would be awarded the social focus label. So this is how it works. Again, practically, you should picture it as one top level and then two sub focuses, depending on the thematic approach that the fund might be or the product might be implementing.
Thank you, Ahmed. It's very clear. Let me bring data on the table again. So what are your expectations in terms of impact measurement? Is a specific methodology to be prioritized compared to the others?
Well, it's one word that I would like the audience to take away about LuxFLAG is that we are pragmatic, right? And being pragmatic means that we take the same approach across our labels. And so here my answer would be similar to the one that I've given about the transition label. At LuxFLAG, we do not mandate a single framework or type of methodology to be implemented by the applicant. So we consider that the field is still evolving, and also that different asset classes require different types of approaches as well. We're not looking at one particular asset class and hence have specific frameworks for this kind of asset class. No. What we do and what LuxFLAG does actually is to require a clearly defined theory of change, baseline data, our starting point basically, quantitative indicators with targets, and the regular reporting between actual versus expected impact over time and through the lifetime, if you want, of the product. Our emphasis will be really on consistency and credibility of the measurement. We will not be aiming at perfection. Really, for us, the consistency and credibility is the name of the game. The methodology must be appropriate with the investment strategy, appropriate and relevant, and of course needs to be documented transparently. We have to be able to understand it So have the investor and the public overall. They also have to be able to understand it through transparent and available documentation. Overall, and if we want to look at specific examples, we would refer to commonly adopted frameworks. I can mention a few names here. For example, the IRIS Plus, impact management project principles, implementation of EU taxonomy KPIs whenever it's relevant. Again, has to be relevant with the thematic approach of the fund and with its impact objective overall. Could be some indicators that relate to the draft social taxonomy. It stayed at the draft level, but still we consider it as an applicable and a valid framework to be adopted. We would be also looking, for example, at the operating principle of impact management, the OPIM standard as well. So the list can go on. There are multiple standards and framework available in terms of framework. Again, for us, I would really insist on consistency and credibility of those measurements, and again, being able to connect those frameworks and those measurements with the fund story or the fund impact objective or the fund objective at all, actually, and understand what we're trying to generate with this investment product. And thank you, Raphael.
Thank you very much, Ahmed, for this very detailed and insightful answers. It has been really great to learn a little bit more about LuxFLAG and about your two new transition and impact labels. We can now turn to the question we have received in the chat. I believe we have already received 2 questions, so let's get started. The first question we received is, how can independent verification of sustainable finance labels ensure ongoing compliance with our criteria and mitigate risk of greenwashing?
Thank you. I can't see that question. Is it in the chat?
It's in the question.
My bad. Okay. Excuse me. Can you come again with the question, Raphael?
How can independent verification of sustainable finance labels ensure ongoing compliance with our criteria and mitigate risk of greenwashing?
Thank you. Yeah, it's Alexandre asking. Thank you for this question. The way it works is that the labels are granted for a period of 3 years. Within this period of 3 years, there's a number of touch points that we're going to have with the applicants, where we actually ensure the ongoing compliance with the criteria. What does it mean in practice? It means that we start with an initial review of the investment product. And then at year 1, we're going to have an intermediary review where we're going to look again at the impact objective, or basically it applies for the 3 labels, but we're going to look at the investment objective and the sustainable investment objective of the product. And then we'll be looking as well, of course, at the translation into the portfolio. So we will be looking predominantly at the intermediary review level at those 2 aspects. We're going to look at whether there's been any change. Is the direction of the fund or the objective of the fund changing? 1. And how big is the portfolio turnover, and is it still aligned with what it says in the question 1 with the objective, right? So we would be looking again at this portfolio. We do that at year 1 intermediary review and year 2 intermediary review. In practice, it means that we're opening the portfolio and we perform a review, a screening of this portfolio. we will be looking at whether there is indeed an alignment between the investment strategy and the assets that we see in the portfolio. And what we will do is to take a sample of this portfolio and ask for evidence about those specific investments in the portfolio. Here, we're going to ask the applicant if they can actually provide us with elements that they have been using to actually demonstrate the link between either the transition or the impact or the sustainability characteristics, depending on the label, of these specific investments that we have witnessed. On our side, we screen and we review the portfolio independently, but what matters is really what is the information available at the manager, how recent it is, how updated has it been, and by which means has it been captured. So this is what we do. One initial review, just to summarize, one initial review, and then we have two intermediary reviews within the lifetime of the label. So this is our 3-year validity period. And then on top of that, we run on a quarterly basis through data platforms a number of compliance review of the portfolios, and where we want to ensure that these portfolios, they are actually compliant with the label exclusions, because the exclusions of the label, they go beyond what is disclosed under the regulatory landscape overall, but we want to make sure that there is no exposure at all and that the portfolio, they remain in line with our exclusion policies of the different labels. And this is a check we run independently on a quarterly basis. If there is any exposure for any reason, then it opens to a discussion with the applicant where we want to understand what happened and whether it's more of a, maybe by analogy for those of the audience who work in risk, and whether it's a more active or passive breach, if you want, and what's the reasoning behind having this type of exposure. So you see that there is a yearly review, and then there's on a quarterly basis a lighter compliance check only focusing on the exclusions. I hope it answered your question, Alexandre.
We have received a second question from Oscar regarding transition bonds. So the question would be, how are transition bonds ICMA aligned characterized within the transition label? Are there any specific consideration for such use of proceeds instruments?
Thank you. So here, what we're having is, about those transition bonds, but there's a little bit more than there's actually a little bit more than that. Maybe we can, if you agree, Oscar, we can indeed stretch it to verified type of bonds or instrument. To answer precisely, yes, climate transition bonds are recognized as eligible sustainable finance instrument. We group them, as I said, alongside green, social, and sustainability-linked bonds. We have indeed in our criteria a category that is especially dedicated to this type of assets. What do we say about it? We said that these recognized instruments, whenever they're used, they must make up at least 75% of the portfolio investments in other bonds, provided that they comply with those internationally recognized standards. So long story short, if you're using fixed income instrument, at least 75% of them should be recognized, internationally recognized instrument.
We have received two new questions. Ahmed,
Sure.
So Nora asks you, within LuxFLAG, who does the independent verification of the product's alignment with the label criteria?
Thank you, Nora. It's a great question. It touches about LuxFLAG governance, actually. By itself, LuxFLAG is an independent body. LuxFLAG is a not-for-profit association. We are based in Luxembourg, and our outreach is, as I mentioned, international. We're not looking only at Luxembourg products or European products, but more generally, as you can see here, we're a global labeling agency. So by itself, as an independent body, we have a mixed board of directors. Our approach is entirely internal, in the sense that we verify ourselves the criteria that we publish about our ESG, our transition, or our impact label. And so by itself, as a standalone not-for-profit association, we are considered as neutral and independent. Where by independent we mean we're not using criteria that are imposed to us by any sort of a state agency. For example, we are connected to the local authorities, but this is a representation in our board of directors. But the design of the criteria and the execution of the verification of those criteria is entirely independent.
Very clear, thank you. And then Victoria asked, to what extent is the upcoming regulation on ESG data provider going to impact the credibility aspect you mentioned when it comes to data and data choice?
Thank you, Victoria. I want to highlight one point that we've made about it, and that was precisely to sort of to give you a first element about this. When I mentioned what LuxFLAG is as a labeling agency and what LuxFLAG is not. So by itself, LuxFLAG is not considered a rating as a rating agency. We're not providing scores or relative assessment. We work with a system that is binary pass-fail, where either you have the label or you don't. But there's really nothing in between. What this regulation is actually bringing for us is that it's providing maybe more transparency about the methodology that the data providers are using, and that is impacting the way that we understand it, and the way that our applicants use them, and to which extent we can operationalize the implementation of our exclusions, for example. So anything that would increase the transparency about data is of course welcome, but that's not only for us. I guess it's for the entire market.
Thank you. I think it's all the questions we received for now. If you have any more questions, please feel free to write them in the chat. Maybe if we have some more time, we have received in advance a question from one of the participants, which is related to transition plan and the way the credibility of the label will depend on the quality of the transition plan of the invested companies. So could you provide an illustration of how LuxFLAG is going to assess the credibility of transition plans?
So the credibility of transition plan, we'll be looking at, and that's already, I would say, we make a distinction with regards to the starting point of the invested companies and where they are currently standing. So first, we sort of split our approach in between hard-to-abate sectors. If you're a company within hard-to-abate sectors, and where we would require not only to have of course, a transition plan, but also to top it up, if you want, with engagement, because we think it's the role of investors, as in fund managers, to be standing alongside these companies to help them improve their trajectory. So that's for the hard-to-abate sectors, companies evolving into hard-to-abate sectors. And then next to it, we would have anything but hard-to-abate sectors, right? Where we would indeed say that we would be looking at different at how the company is indeed located on the map of sectors and the industrial aspects. So we would be relying on a number of elements, and those are as well available publicly on our website in our criteria. So what do we have here? On the first, we have framework alignment. So we would be looking at whether those transition plans, they are built using internationally recognized standards. This is something we've mentioned earlier. Typically, I mentioned the examples of SBTI or CREM in the real estate. So that's the science-based and time-bound target. In terms of excuse me, I said framework alignment, right? So within the framework alignment, we're looking at what I've mentioned, those recognized international standards. Then the second element, that would be about whether those are science-based and whether there are science-based and time-bound targets. Those plans, the credibility of those plans will depend on whether they include features about quantifiable science-based target and explicit clause or milestones or sunset clause to go out these unabated, for example, fossil fuel capacities. But here really we would be looking at, again, one, whether there's framework alignment, two, whether there are science-based and time-bound targets, three, whether there are technical safeguards. So we want to ensure whether there is whether the plan avoid those what is called the carbon lock-in, where we establish technological necessity for emission activities, and whether it includes specific mitigation action. So really here I'm going through, I would say, the elements that relate to the judgment or to the assessment of the credibility of a transition plan. And then last but not least, fourth point that we're mentioning is the stewardship and governance. And I think it's something that we're really insisting on. We do think that credibility is maintained through mandatory pre-investment due diligence, of course, ongoing active investor engagement, and a commitment to monitoring and to report annually. So in a nutshell, the four key points that we'd like to use to assess on the credibility of a plan, that would be one, framework alignment, two, science-based and time-bound target, three, technical safeguards, and four, stewardship and governance. If you have those four aspects covered in your evidence or documentation of the plan that is established between an asset manager and an investing company, then there's high chance that we do indeed consider it as a credible plan.
Thank you very much, Ahmed, for all your answers. I don't think we have any more questions, so I think we can wrap this up. It was very nice chatting with you about this very interesting topic. If any of the participants has any more following question, you can of course contact us WeeFin or LuxFLAG. And I wish you a very nice day.
Thank you all. Thank you for your good questions. And as Raphael mentioned, you are absolutely welcome to get back to us with any question.
Goodbye.